Ready to dive into something really interesting? We're jumping headfirst into modern Turkish foreign policy.
Let's do it.
Today, we're tackling the Lausanne Syndrome.
Ah, yes.
It's about how a treaty signed way back in 1923 still shapes how Turkey acts on the world stage today.
It really is fascinating how history leaves its mark, isn't it? I mean, to still have this kind of impact nearly a century later.
It's like the ghost of the Ottoman Empire is still lingering. So, what exactly is this Lausanne Syndrome?
Well, just imagine feeling like a part of you, a crucial part of your identity was just ripped away. That sense of loss, that feeling of injustice, that's really at the heart of the Lausanne Syndrome.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's rooted in the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne, the one that officially ended the Ottoman Empire and led to the birth of modern Turkey as we know it.
A bit like the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. It aimed for peace, but ended up sparking new conflicts down the line.
Exactly. You see, the Lausanne Treaty, while it did grant Turkey recognition, it also formalized the loss of vast Ottoman territories. And this loss, well, it created a sense of resentment, a feeling among some that they had been wronged by the international community.
It's almost like moving out of your childhood home. You've moved on, but you still miss it, and maybe you're even a bit angry about having to leave in the first place.
That's a great way to put it. And within Turkey itself, this feeling of loss fueled some pretty intense ideological clashes.
Oh, I bet.
You had Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the father of modern Turkey, pushing for a secular republic, right?
Right.
But then, at the same time, you had this faction known as the Second Group, led by Ali Shukru.
I've heard of them, weren't they?
They saw Ataturk's reforms as a betrayal of traditional Ottoman and Islamic values.
So even back then, this tension already existed, this pull between the Ottoman past and the desire to forge a new Turkish identity.
Exactly. And the Second Group's viewpoint, especially their resistance to those territorial concessions in the Lausanne Treaty, well, that's become a touchstone for those who believe in the Lausanne Syndrome today.
It's incredible how these historical echoes can still be felt so strongly today.
It really is.
It wasn't just about losing land. It was about a nation's soul trying to find its place in a world that was changing rapidly around them.
Yes, and trying to make sense of its place in that new world.
So we've been talking about this tension, this push and pull between a modern Turkish identity and a yearning for the Ottoman past. But how did this Lausanne syndrome go from a fringe idea to something that's actually shaping how Turkey acts on the world stage today?
Yeah, it's a fascinating process, really. It didn't happen overnight, that's for sure.
Right.
It was gradual, with certain key events acting as catalysts, you could say.
Okay.
And I think a major turning point was the 1974 Cyprus intervention.
Ah, yes, Cyprus. I can see how that would be significant.
While it was primarily a response to the coup and the very real threat to Turkish Cypriots on the island,
Of course.
it also tapped into this wellspring of resentment over the loss of Ottoman territory.
Right, because Cyprus used to be part of the Ottoman Empire.
Exactly.
So it's like this event, as tragic as it was, provided an opportunity, a testing ground almost, for using the Lausanne syndrome to justify a more assertive Turkish foreign policy.
You got it. And this pattern, well, it kind of continued.
Did it?
Oh, yeah. You see it, for example, with Turgut Özal's time as president in the 1980s.
What did he do?
He was actually the first Turkish leader to openly evoke Ottoman nostalgia in his speeches,
Interesting.
emphasizing Turkey's historical and cultural ties to the broader Muslim world.
So he started to kind of awaken those old sentiments, those echoes of the past.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But then, of course, then comes the Erdogan era.
And here's where things get really interesting, am I right?
You could say that again.
Because Erdogan didn't shy away from this simmering resentment. He brought it front and center, didn't he?
Absolutely. He made it a central theme of his time in office, no doubt.
Can you give us an example?
One very striking example is a statement he made back in 2016.
What did he say?
He very pointedly declared that Turkey cannot draw boundaries around its heart.
Wow, that's pretty powerful language.
It sounds poetic, sure, but believe me, it carries enormous geopolitical weight, signaling a Turkey that's no longer content with the status quo.
It's like saying, hey, we're not bound by lines on a map that were drawn a century ago.
Exactly. It's about revising, or at least challenging, the old world order.
So how did this rhetoric, these strong words, translate into concrete actions on the ground?
Well, look no further than Turkey's stance in the Eastern Mediterranean, for instance.
Okay.
Their Blue Homeland Doctrine, it asserts their claim over this vast maritime area, one that happens to be rich in natural gas.
Oh, and I bet that hasn't gone down well with their neighbors, has it?
Not so much. Greece and Cyprus especially aren't too thrilled, put it mildly.
So they're literally like redrawing the map based on this idea that they were treated unfairly almost 100 years ago.
It's a bold move, for sure, one driven by a sense of historical grievance, but also by very real present-day ambitions to become a major player in the energy game.
It's fascinating, really, how history and geopolitics are so intertwined.
It is, isn't it?
Yeesh.
And this assertiveness, well, it's not just confined to the Eastern Mediterranean either.
Really?
You see it in Turkey's military involvement in Syria, where they're establishing a sphere of influence along their border.
Right.
And let's not forget their efforts to reassert influence in Mosul in Iraq.
Which, of course, was a key city during the Ottoman Empire.
Exactly. A
So-
city with deep, deep Ottoman ties.
It's almost as if Erdogan is trying to reshape the entire geopolitical landscape, almost picking up where the Ottoman Empire left off.
It's a provocative way of looking at it, but yeah, there's definitely a sense of that.
And what's alarming, I imagine, for other countries is that this isn't just about historical claims. This has real-world implications.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about regional stability, global power dynamics, the whole 9 yards.
You said it.
Okay, so we've gone back in time to the roots of the Lausanne Syndrome, and we've seen how it's shaping Turkey's actions in the world today.
It's like we've dug up this ancient fault line in their national psyche, and now we're witnessing the tremors, the aftershocks across their foreign policy.
And I think a lot of people are wondering what happens next. I mean, is Turkey on this crash course with the rest of the world?
That's the big question, isn't it? And honestly, there are no simple answers.
Right.
The Lausanne Syndrome, it's not just one thing, right? It's a potent blend of history, national pride, strategic ambition.
It's complicated.
Very much so. I mean, predicting the future, it's like trying to read coffee grounds, but we can at least explore some possibilities, some potential scenarios that might play out.
Okay, so no crystal ball, but let's game this out a little.
Sure.
What's one way this could go?
Well, one possibility is that Turkey just continues on the path it's on.
The path it's on. Okay.
Imagine a Turkey that distances itself further and further from the West, that builds stronger ties with powers like Russia, and pursues its goals even more aggressively.
So like a neo-Ottoman power emerging in the East, kind of challenging the existing world order.
It sounds like something out of a movie, right?
Yeah.
But it's not entirely implausible.
Right.
But even in this scenario, there are risks, big ones.
Okay, like what?
Well, for starters, Turkey's economy is still very interconnected with Europe.
True.
And even with a strong military, they can't take on NATO or Russia alone.
Right, there are limits
Exactly. So it's a dangerous game, a tightrope walk.
where one misstep could have huge consequences, yeah.
Precisely. So another possibility, a different path.
Okay.
What if Turkey decides to change course?
Change course, how?
They could recognize that, yes, they have a right to be a strong regional power, but that also means being part of a stable international system.
So more of a balancing act.
Exactly. Less saber-rattling, more diplomacy, more cooperation, finding common ground instead of always drawing lines in the sand.
So maybe dialing back the tough talk, using a softer touch.
Right. And, you know, there are actually some signs that this might be happening. Turkey's been taking steps to improve relations with Egypt and Israel, and they've played a pretty constructive role in trying to mediate the conflict in Libya.
Oh, interesting. So maybe they're realizing that everyone wins if you can find a way to work together.
It's possible.
Mhm.
Now, look, this doesn't mean the Lausanne Syndrome is going to just vanish overnight.
Right, it's deep-rooted.
Exactly. It's like this old, gnarled oak tree. Its roots run deep.
So how do you even begin to deal with something like that? I mean, how can the world even begin to address something so deeply ingrained in how an entire nation sees itself?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's not just about foreign policy here. This is about identity. It's about how people see their nation's story, their past, their place in the world.
It's almost like a national scar.
In a way, yes.
A constant reminder of past wounds, real or perceived. So is this just an endless cycle then? Are we doomed to see these patterns repeat themselves?
Well, that's the challenge before us, isn't it? Because overcoming the Lausanne Syndrome, it takes more than just words. It takes a real effort from everyone.
What do you mean?
The world needs to really grapple with the roots of Turkey's actions, understand where they're coming from,
Yeah.
and at the same time, Turkey has to find a way to reconcile its past with its future, a way to move forward without being held back by the weight of history.
It sounds like a delicate dance.
It is a very delicate dance.
So much to consider. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the fall of an empire to the rise of a new global player. It's been fascinating to delve into the Lausanne Syndrome to see how a treaty signed almost a century ago still shapes how Turkey acts in the world today. And for our listeners, we'll leave you with this final thought. Can Turkey bridge the gap between its Ottoman legacy and its role in the 21st century? Can it truly be a bridge between East and West, or will it remain caught in the middle? Think about that, and until next time, keep diving deep